do you think a lot of people go to college, university kind of unnecessarily just to tick a box versus like they're actually going there with a purpose?
So, if my gut, if I'm being frank, yeah, I'm an advocate for if university or college works for you, that's great. If I had to do it myself and understanding all that I went through, I would have foregone college and built different businesses in the domain. And by that, like a trade, I would have tried to do HVAC, a painting, a car wash, something to learn and perfect those sales skills and build those side businesses up before, as I moved into what I was getting into here now. And it would only mature because I feel like college helped, but it delayed this kind of the applied science of what I'm doing now that I would have learned sooner and would have built up more resources during that time to perfect it.
So today we have on the show Paul Gunn Jr., who is the CEO of Kuod Corporation. Going to be talking around a few different themes, empathy in business, about this term heart intelligence, which I hadn't heard before. So he's going to be breaking that down. And also about the interconnectedness of everything. We're going to be talking about a story of just coming from a place of curiosity with someone in a flower shop, totally not related to his business, and it ended up leading to a customer. So we're going to be talking a lot about what we call curiosity and natural curiosity. Perfect, Paul. So another thing I saw you were posting about recently was heart intelligence. So I was wondering if you could run us through what is heart intelligence?
Well, that's good. So in my mind, it's how I see. I often refer to all taking the heart intelligence and using wisdom of the heart, and I would say it from that standpoint. Hey, you're using those feelings and what you know or sense, almost intuition, and mirroring logic with what you know in your heart, and having a fluidity between what you see, what that situation calls for. It is all moving really quickly. How do you assess the person? What's that situation? What do you feel in that intuition in that moment that if you're thinking from that person's position may best benefit them without hurting you? So it's using the wisdom because each situation is different. You're not going to apply it from one person in one situation and the same as another.
Interesting. Yeah, I find it interesting as well because I feel like, the term trust your gut or intuition, often we talk about it a lot in like personal life, but I feel like
Yeah.
when it comes to business, often it's seen as like a bit of a dirty word, like intuition.
Yeah.
It's like there's got to be data behind it and everything with technology is like we got to track this and make decisions based on numbers. But as you said, and I've definitely felt this in my career, sometimes you do have to trust your gut and your intuition with a lot of these things as well. So I don't know if you've like had any experiences with your business as well where that, that intuition, that heart intelligence has come in.
Well, yeah, so there was in the last company we had somebody, and it was interesting. They referenced themselves as old school, and you kind of read some of the books that how people dealt and stayed focused in on character. What happened was we won a very large contract, but at that time it was above our capital needs. So we went to the vendor, we sat with them, we said, "Hey, look, we're not able to do this without your help." And what was interesting, what they said when we came in there, they were like, look, we more wanted to see about who your character was. We wanted to see how you were going to engage with us. We wanted to see all these intangibles. And when they made the risk decision to work with us, they said that what the most important thing was, yes, they were going to trust their intuition, but they saw all the intangibles of character, what was important. So for me to see and later hear, that's how they ran their company. That's how they picked their vendors. Yes, they didn't always get it right, but in that particular situation with us, it was meaningful because my intuition at that time was saying, hey, look, we need to call a meeting. We need to come see you because if you don't help us, we're just not going to be able to do this contract. It was a pivotal moment for us. It took us into a big trajectory to understand where we were at that time, how to go after another level of contract. So being able to sit with them, talk with them, and see not only was it me utilizing my intuition to sit there and go call that meeting, they were doing the same. And there was a mirror of the two. When I left that meeting, the most important thing that happened to me, aside from them working with us, was seeing that you can have success utilizing that, and to hear that verbal confirmation from them how they built their success doing the same.
Very interesting. So essentially they were almost like testing you out with the sale and saying, hey, this is what we need. They knew that you probably couldn't do it internally and saying, would you be honest about that and like come back to them in that sense?
Yeah, they were. They were asking, "Hey, well, can you handle this?" And we just were frank. I was frank about, "Hey, look, we have the orders, we have this, but we need your help. If you don't help, we're not in the real position. We can have a teaming, we can have an arrangement."
Yeah.
And it was just fully transparent with them. I didn't hide anything. Saying, "Look, if you can't do it, that's okay. We'll just go back." I didn't want to have to go back. It was a big deal that we had, but we just left everything on the table, and that wasn't typical because we were told don't go in there and tell them everything about it. They can essentially take it, but they didn't do that. They're like, well, because you came forward, we're going to work with you. It's yours. You go deal with it. And they, to this day, are one of our top vendors working with, even in this company.
That's a great story. I think it's very in line with the topic of the show here, the Cosmic Bridge, right? Because it's that obviously it led to big material success. It was a big value contract for you, but
Yeah.
that spiritual connection of you, there was from the start, that relationship of like honesty and integrity. And as you said, probably because of that, you're still working with this company today, right?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. And then I know another thing you talk about a lot is like empathy. And again, that's not a word that's like thrown around that much in business. I'm a fan of Chris Voss. I know he talks about tactical empathy, but yeah, why do you think empathy is important in the workplace?
So one of the things that I first got into entrepreneurship watching my father at a young age, I would see him. He didn't really build a big company, but what I saw, he helped a lot of other people do their accounting and just would always advise them. And as a young age, what I saw from him was how people talked about his character in business. That's the first thing they would mention with him. And I would see that response, and it left a mark on me. And every time that I was in, or more often than not, I was in situations where customers and vendors were talking a reason why they're working with someone or what was the lasting impact. It had to do with how them people made them feel. And it may be status quo or seeing it, but even in my own experience, when you run into somebody and how they interact with you, how they make you feel, how they talk to you, and there's no line of, I would say, positional power. If you went to a meeting or you went to go see a vendor conference and the person you were needing to see was just talking to you, two humans back and forth, you, I left more from those relationships and stuff stemmed and came out of those than when ego was necessarily put in there. So I feel you have a bridge, like your show just talking about, to just go back and forth. It may not happen right then, but I found those bridges come really in play when it's critical and it's over troubled waters.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I like something you said around like the way you make people feel as well. I
Yeah,
think there's that quote, I think it's from Maya Angelou, around like people don't remember what you say, but they remember the way you make them feel.
yeah.
And I see it in my profession of sales training. Sometimes I work with salespeople, and it's like they've got like an alter ego. So it's like they're themselves at home, and then in business they put on this like mask and they pretend to be some like corporate person. I say no, just be yourself. People want to connect with you on a human level. But how do you think that, you know, in your business and yourself, how do you think people can connect with people on that deeper level and, you know, as you said, make them feel a certain way?
So it's interesting you just talked about how you have sales training, and I feel that it's so important when you come in. The first only real corporate job I had out of school was a salesman. And I remember our manager at the time, there was a sales rep. He was just killing it. He was making all the sales. And at that time, it was, you could not, you weren't allowed to email the buyers at the corporation, but these were big conference events. So I pulled him over and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm emailing the people." And when I got one time, I got a lady on the phone in there to book the conference. And she said, "Well, you're lucky you picked the phone up." I picked the phone up because I usually don't. I prefer when someone shows that they care about the position I am and they email me. I have the time to look at it because I don't like to be having a phone call where you're just hard selling me. Let me look at it, provide the contact, and I will reach back out to you. So I did that. She spoke to me then I emailed her the information. And I learned from that point, hey, if I looked across the domain of who we were trying to get in that company, most of them wanted their time respected. I feel that's across the board, but even more specifically, what they were in, they needed the email. Most of them were saying, yes, I need the email for me to take the time to go and learn it. And it showed that level of care. Now, somebody may choose to want to have the phone calls and go back and forth. But this particular instance, it was learning and understanding your customer and say, hey, what is it that they need versus what is it that I want to do? Of course, I need to make this sale, but they prefer to receive it in a way. So being able to utilize that is important.
Yeah, and obviously every person's different as well, right? You said that person likes emails, but there's going to be others maybe that prefer calls, that prefer LinkedIn, that prefer whatever it is. So it's like meeting your buyer where they are as well.
Yeah, and then you're talking about that. I think it was Cambridge. It was a report out to a paper out 2019. If I can find it, I'll send you the link. They were actually breaking down emotional empathy and then cognitive empathy, and the profit margins actually increase with cognitive empathy because you're going in there, you're listening to the customer, you're listening and seeing what the needs are of your own needs, and what you're doing is you're you're not pushing back in force, but in compassion to say, here, I hear what you're saying. Listen to the logic, and I'm going to tell you or show you why this is a value add to you. Let me deliver it to you in a compassionate way. But you just haven't said, I'm going to, I feel bad for you. Let me make the sale or reduce the price. You're actually positioning a value. If that current customer you see through all of that logic and kindness and compassion needs maybe a discount or something, you're not lessening the value. You're applying it to that one specific situation. And the numbers were just alarming to see. You actually increase it, I think it was by 0.25%, almost 25% with cognitive empathy versus just showing the emotional empathy. So it was really good to see living this way and the research back behind it was showing you can make an impact.
You mentioned cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. What's the difference between the two?
So in this one, it was talking about, okay, so if you're coming to me and you sell me something and then I feel, so what most people may take it as, or what this paper was really wrenching, respecting or showing was kind of what I feel perception is. Oh, I feel bad. I feel you. I'm sorry. All right, you need a cheaper price. Let me cut it in half. And the paper went to explain that those people who don't have the training and premise their sales on emotional empathy, they'll get higher revenue, but they're going to get lower margin because they're cutting it because they're leaning on the feeling of it alone and not combining the logic behind it. Now, the cognitive is taking what you know with reason, applying both the emotional and logic together to come in and say, hey, look, I viewed the situation. I hear how you're feeling. I see how it is, but let's look at a holistic approach from mind and I'd say heart intelligence to use wisdom of the heart and deliver it in compassion.
Interesting. Yeah, again, it goes to the kind of theme of the show with the cosmic bridge of the logical side, the rational side, like you're talking about, and then it's more of the feeling, spiritual side. And I guess you kind of need both of those things, right, for the deal.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Nice. And how about in like your role as well now? How are you connecting with people on those two things, right? So I don't know if you've got any stories yourself. Have you mentioned one earlier of like, the rational side? You call it cognitive empathy and like emotional empathy. Any like, tactic stories you've got on that?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. So there was a time when we were doing this. It always mattered to me. We were setting up. I was setting up Comcast in our home at the time, and one of the guys was in one of the units that we helped retrofit. So when he got to speaking and telling us, he said, "Oh, you helped put the parts in. You helped support that program." And then what he did, he was like, "Look, I know you didn't build the unit, but you helped support it." And he went on for 5 minutes just thanking me, saying, "Hey, I'm home because you helped and you played a part in me being in that unit that saved my life." And from there, it just took it to another level to say, look, it's not just the emotion of, hey, we're feeling good, we're doing this and supporting others. It really put me in a position when you go into a vendor, especially some of them are combative. They really don't like, if they don't know you right out the gate, they'll be standoffish. So what happens is you got to come in there and express the logic. Say, hey, look, I need you to help this. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than what you're looking for. Okay, so yes, I'm touching on the emotion to get them, but at the same time, I'm bringing in logic. It's a win-win for everybody because it's not just you not wanting to work with me. There's somebody on the other side of this. Put your ego aside. Let's find a way to work together that can have reason. And this has turned people who have been staunch not wanting to work to say in so many ways, well, yeah, Paul, I'll work with you. I had a vendor one time tell me, you could tell your customer, I'm God to you, I'm God to them, and I'm not doing it. And I used that same scenario saying, hey, look, this is bigger than me. Will you at least consider this for this one time? And eventually turned and he helped get the process out. And he was a good vendor for a while. He still was testy and he was driven by his ego. But yeah, I just had to learn at those times I had to position logic and reason with him.
Yeah. And then something I wanted to come on to as well, with regards to kind of what you're talking around with logic and reason, and then like the emotional side of things as well. So I was listening. We actually had a guest on the show a couple of weeks ago. He's like a leadership coach, and his
Okay.
background was he was like a leader actually in the army in the UK, and he ended up getting into like actually business leadership now because a lot of the principles, same principles apply. And one of the things he said, and I actually heard this on another podcast with this guy Simon Sinek, who also does leadership coaching, getting into the why we're doing things. He actually said, which I was surprised by, a lot of people in the military are seen as more, I guess, like macho, right? And maybe not as in touch with their emotions. But he actually found the opposite, like getting really into this space, working very closely with military leaders, often with each other. There was like more of an emotional connection than he'd seen with like any other profession. And he, before working with the military, had been very like in the business sides. I know a lot of the work you do is like confidential, but I do know you're working with like military aspects as well and agencies. And I was wondering if like you found that as well, that connection with military people.
Yes, and I'll be frank, anyone who has ever left a mark on me from that has been military. They've when I needed help with the first company, we needed access to capital, former military. When we needed to get into a different vendor or how the process was to do things a better way, former military. And all the instances, it's just been meaningful to me because that was the approach. Paul, this is what matters. We're concerned about character. We're concerned about how you interact. Can I trust you? If something goes wrong, which things do go wrong, how are you going to react? Those were the main things. Can I trust you? What's going to happen when stuff goes wrong? Are you going to be able to endure? Are you going to be able to be transparent when those things happen? And that left a mark on me because each of the times that I needed the help, it was a pivotal moment. And at those pivotal moments, the things that I thought they would be concerned about that was a later and after fact. But the primary was, I need to know that this bridge between our relationship is very strong and that I can trust you. So you speak very well on it, and it shows itself in this line of work when you come in, because ultimately someone else lives on the line, someone else in a position far from where I am is needing that trust to be maintained and those bridges to be upheld.
Yeah, as you said, it's I guess even more, and it makes sense. I never thought about this before, but like for them, it's like lives are on the line in their
Yeah.
sense of work, so it's natural that they're going to have that more emotional connection.
Yes. And
Yeah,
sometimes there's a lot of things that aren't seen. So sometimes you need to be able to get stuff done that it's not in the public eye, and you
yeah.
have to really trust and you have to know because things can go sideways very quickly.
Well, obviously we talked a lot around today around your business with this concept of like logical, rational, or the emotional side. How is having that balance like affected you like outside of work as well, maybe with some of your personal relationships?
It's left a good one because what happens is I'm always curious. I'm naturally curious, like how we can. Oh, that's interesting what you do. How does that apply with your work? And when you come in to approach, that you learn different things cross borders, across cultures. And when you come from a position to wanting to understand what makes someone do what they do, why they do what they do, how those conversations are started, leave lasting impacts. And sometimes I've found that has been the fastest connection right back into the line of work we do. It's been interesting. I've ran into someone who owned a flower shop, just asking, hey, well, why do you like using flowers? What is it different from you? And that person was basically best friends at one of the vendors we needed to wear at the top. So yeah, I'm having an interesting issue getting this unit. Can you help me? He's like, oh yeah, I go to lunch with that person all the time. Here, well, I'll give you and all this time up before, even though I wasn't pushing, I didn't know. I simply ran into the person, naturally curious about what they were doing different about their flower shop, how it affected them. Because I think that had something to do with that ice issue out in Texas that time, maybe a year ago or something like that. And we were trying to just be kind to understand what was going on with them, how it was going to affect them, and how we could help them.
Yeah, I love that because yeah, I guess you wouldn't normally have thought a flower shop could be like related to some of the
Yeah.
work you're doing, but it's like you said, you never know where these connections are going to come, and that's kind of the beauty of life. That often, someone in the flower shop is connected to someone from a totally different profession that's related to what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's just different. How does empathy and kindness work in what we're doing, and how does it apply into a commercial setting or in different industry, completely different? So I'm naturally curious to want to know how people work, how they succeed in what they're doing, because if it's something that I can learn from that I'm not taking kind of a bird's eye view. What is it that they're doing that I can apply and make something better in this line of work? That's only going to help me become a better person. Is it going to help me become a better leader? How has somebody positioned their company where they can speak freely and it not necessarily affect their work, or they can move in between different domains and it helps them? So there's a natural curiosity for that, and being able to position and connect and meet with people, not necessarily seeking something from them, but to understand them, has really built relationships.
Do you mentioned an interesting term in natural curiosity, and this is something we're trying to get. So in our profession, sales, we're trying to get salespeople to be more naturally curious, and even just in general, I like to hire people that are curious, or like have friends that are curious. But do you think curiosity is something that's like innate, or do you think you can teach people to be more curious?
That's a well. I'm not an expert, so I would take a guess. I think you can be trained. I think it's something innate. I would say with me it was innate. In school, I would say there were some difficult times because if a teacher got on a subject and it just stayed there, my mind would just wander. It's like, oh, I'm curious, what does this mean? What does it do? And they'd long go on to another subject, and I'm still stuck on my mind wandering onto there. So I do think there's some natural tendencies for others to have it, but I think experiences will may put other people in those positions, and if you put them in the right place or show them what it is that's tied internally to them that makes them curious about it. Because somebody's not interested in fish, there's none. It seems like there's nothing you can be able to do. But if you tie that application to what they enjoy, there may be a curiosity tied to it.
Yeah, I was also thinking you obviously got different personalities with like extroverts and introverts. And I think sometimes the introvert can be naturally more curious because they're happy to kind of take a step back and listen and ask questions. But sometimes I've worked with people who are like extremely extrovert, and it's not that they're not curious, it's just they're giving so much of themselves. Sometimes they fail to take a step back and think around, okay, what can I learn in this situation? So I think like you said, yeah, it can be innate, but it can also be taught because if you're an extrovert, it's just like, okay, reel some of yourself in so you can learn about the other person as well.
See, you bring up introvert, and I would align a lot to the heaviness to that alignment. And I would say most of the time, because of being in social settings or being in that way, that natural curiosity would put myself to want to know, okay, if I have to go to the event, let me understand the people I'm going to, because most of the times I wouldn't want to be there, or I want to find a person in the room that I could have that one-on-one conversation or go back and forth. So trying to come out of that tendency to have that introversion would spark a lot of curiosity to, if I got to pick a call up, if I have to engage with somebody, what can I do to help temper the
Yeah.
internal stuff that goes on with me from having to reach out? So that's why LinkedIn has been interesting to me for being able to help with introversion, because it's like you can respond to a post, you can send a note, or you can send something out, and it kind of warms that bridge versus having to necessarily go out in public. And now when you go out to a public setting, you've had time to engage with somebody. So for those, I'm grateful for technology like that.
Yeah, 100%. I was wondering, may I give my own view here and experience, and because I think you and I are similar in the sense that we like to like find out about other people and be curious, but in I find because of that sometimes it can be a weakness because I prefer to have like a more intimate group of maybe like two is great like this, or
Yeah.
like three, four, and then once it's getting to like five, six, like in my profession, I actually prefer a smaller workshop with like 5 people versus like 30 people. And it's because I can't connect with every individual. Like there's just too many people in the room. So I kind of struggle with that versus someone that is, and I would say to some extent I'm extrovert, some extent I'm introvert, but someone who's very extrovert, they love that being on a stage and like having like loads of people around them. But I don't know if you found that in your like being naturally curious, maybe actually if you've got like a big group, it's a little bit overwhelming.
I know you speak it. I fully embracing that. So when the conferences would come out, I wouldn't want to go, even though I needed to be there. I would look for the breakout session, and this was a growing process for me. I'd admit it. There was errors that I made that I probably should have spent more time to get face on face with vendors. So I'd go to the conferences, and when they would have the breakout one-on-one sessions, then I would make sure I signed up, because then I can engage and get to learn with the people there. When I should have probably spent more time going in the larger groups, but it's uncomfortable. And I know, like you say, you don't really talk about spirituality sometimes in like the business sense, but there would be times I'd walk in that room and it's like I could sense all the energy, and it would come overwhelming. So I'd have to go in, I'd step out in the room, and sometimes in the halls when I would see a name badge or connect, I was like, okay, now I can grab this person one on one and have a conversation. But yes, I do prefer the small groups, because then you can understand the thinking. In a large setting, yes, it can get overwhelming and there's a tendency, but this is the growing part I know I'm constantly working on to do. So I do prefer those small, more intimate groups.
So you mentioned it's something you're working on. What have you done to like help you with that?
So I admit, LinkedIn has helped me in a way, because I used to not want to post. I'd go on there and I'd just look. I'd read other people. I wouldn't even like, because I didn't even want to be kind of known as seen or seen per se. But then when the pandemic hit and realized, look, if this thing's around for a while, this may be my time to learn and engage. So engaging and then meeting like-minded people, where it would take a while. So I would like, and then some of them would reach out, hey, thanks for liking my post. And then I was like, oh, well, here's a warm welcome. And I'd start on the messages, and then I would get a comfort level. So those have been helpful in doing stuff like this, where hey, hey, Bob, how you doing? Let's go ahead and have a conversation. We have those conversations, and it makes it easier to kind of come out of it. It's still a work in progress. It's not easy, but now when those events come, I'll go find out, well, hey, are you going to that event? I'm going to be here at this location. And now I know there's somebody there I can have a conversation with, at least go back and forth. If I need to break away, I can break away and come back.
Yeah, no, great. LinkedIn's had that powerful effect for
Yeah.
you. I just wanted to ask one last question, Paul. So, a question we always ask is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
So I'm an advocate for, if university or college works for you, that's great. If I had to do it myself and understanding all that I went through, I would have foregone college and built different businesses in the domain. And by that, like a trade, I would have tried to do HVAC, a painting, a car wash, something to learn and perfect those sales skills and build those side businesses up before as I moved into what I was getting into here now. And it would only matured because I feel like college helped, but it delayed this kind of the applied science of what I'm doing now that I would have learned sooner and would have built up more resources during that time to perfect it. So
So,
I would have foregone college and anchored in just going into business right away.
so I said that was going to be the last question, but what you said was interesting. So I'm going to ask another question now, which is, do you think a lot of people go to college, university kind of unnecessarily just to tick a box versus like they're actually going there with a purpose?
If my gut, if I'm being frank, yeah, I think some of that can be foregone because selling, and like you say, it was into my first sales job. They broke out. You need to be here for 2 to 3 years just to gain a base, just to gain an understanding how the process and taught work. So it was 5 years that they like to say. And I had a big guy come from a big stock firm saying, you need 5 good years to understand, get training, and get that done. And it's preferably good if you get it at 15, 16, or the sooner you can get it out of school. He used to advise all the people that were coming in, you need to learn sales. Learn it because you're going to learn all these intangibles that can be transferred over into other parts of industries if you go there. You're going to learn how to talk to people. You're going to understand how they tick. So it's something that I feel like school doesn't teach you. You can read it in a book, but until you've gone and understand it, sales is something I feel like you have to experience to understand it and then be able to apply it.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. So, Paul, I'll put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Is there anything else, any other like resources you'd like to send anyone?
Well, I know I appreciate you having me on here. I did kind of write a book on my story and what it was that helped me succeed more is speaking on just how empathy played a role in my life and leaving it for any of those youth who feel it may not have an impact on them.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put a link to the book as well. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming on, Paul. I've enjoyed the chat.
Same here.
It's an interesting show with Paul today. I really like that story of the interconnectedness of everything and trying to be genuinely curious about every single person you meet. Paul never thought having a conversation with someone about a flower shop would lead to him getting a customer for his business related to logistics. But there's that phrase 7 degrees of separation, and this is really a good thing to show. Often it's not 7 degrees, it's 1, 2 degrees. So being naturally curious about everyone you meet. If you'd like to share this podcast with anyone, please WhatsApp or share the link with them. Subscribe to us across podcast platforms, listen to us on YouTube, and then we'll see you next week.